Hi, I'm Wendy Saul, a member of the Rosendale Theatre Board and formerly president of the International Book Bank. I look forward to answering any questions that you have about this presentation on March 24th at 7 p.m. This is a picture of William Kwamkama shortly after he built his windmill. He's holding a donated book he found in the tiny local library in his village. Where did that book come from? Well, stick with me, I actually know the answer. It's a lovely, kind gesture to bring books with you when you travel, and for those of us who love books, it's especially satisfying. But we need to realize that such efforts truly represent a tiny droplet of medicine in a huge, deep, gaping wound, a tiny droplet in the ocean. Compared to the rest of the world, we in the US have a huge abundance of learning resources. And we have institutions like libraries and schools that are dedicated to getting books to young people. We also have bookstores and publishing houses, and they all work together to create a well resourced country. I work in many countries that are less well resourced, where there are no publishers and few books, which makes learning incredibly difficult. So, how do you address this challenge? And it is a challenge. Let's say we want to help. We're ready to share the wealth. Let's look at the space called book donations. Perhaps some of you have actually taken books to a book donation collection site. Actually, this is how I got involved with the International Book Bank. I was in Liberia working with teachers when we heard that a shipment of 1 million books promised by then President George W. Bush was arriving. So a friend and I trooped down to the warehouse to see what was happening. It was a huge mess. Dog-eared copies of Tessa the Dubervilles, books on microwave cooking in a country where kids were literally doing homework under street lamps because electricity was no longer available. I saw a book on preparing for your LSAT in Spanish. They were publisher-donated CDs with no accompanying reading materials. It was a big mess. Still, various sorters were there trying to divide up books as best they could to send to libraries across the country. I kind of thought of it as a warehouse filled with used shoes. How do you make sense of it? So there's this challenge. It has to do with assessing and sorting books. The goal is not simply putting books in piles. Who thinks about the condition of the book, the cultural appropriateness, the reading and developmental level? If you're a 16-year-old who is just learning to read, do you really want to see books of 6-year-olds? And then there's the language. It's not just whether it's in English or Kiswahili, but also the terminology used. Think Valley Girls Go to Burundi. So there is a better model. My friend who headed up a large Canadian organization that supported literacy learning in sub-Saharan Africa for almost 50 years turned to me and asked me if I would consider volunteering for the International Book Bank. He said that organization also has problems, but maybe they were fixable. What would be a good model for sourcing books? Well, I think a better model involves publishers, authors, and book distributors donating overstock and out-of-print materials. This would be new materials, and they could use it for tax-deductible donations. Materials needed to be vetted to ensure that they were culturally sensitive and appropriate. Yes, and sometimes you had to turn down books because they didn't have a place in that part of the world. You also needed to have a wide variety of materials from pre-K through university level. So the next challenge is actually matching requests to available inventory. If you're sending books to a school, a single copy isn't nearly as valuable as a class set. You need to think about the recipient population. Are they familiar with things like snowstorms and apples? People in this part of the world did not want books that involve sex, religion, or what I'm going to call devils. Witchcraft is a very dicey issue in that part of the world. And they were looking for books with minimal U.S. cultural references, whether we're talking about our third president of the United States or how to become a Supreme Court judge. That stuff just didn't resonate in the way that other books, like a book on energy, might, which isn't filled with cultural references. And then there's the issue of textbooks versus trade books. Textbooks meaning they're designed for instructional purposes, and trade books, which are really to encourage pleasure reading. So we created IBB, or a new IBB. It involved getting books from publishers and then sending them out to schools, libraries, and charities. IBB inventory was processed into a cloud-based inventory system from which recipient organizations could then choose the titles they wanted. But there's yet another challenge. A good book donation program needs a rigorous application process that ensures that the materials go to eligible end users. Some book donation groups are okay with simply sending shipments and letting locals sell them. We were not. Any organization using donated books as an in-kind donation as part of a grant, for instance, had to ensure that the books reach their intended audience. There are many non-governmental organizations, also referred to as NGOs, that work with pre-identified schools. For instance, World Vision Canada has their group. Catholic Relief Services has their group. Code has their group. So these organizations are sort of stables that we could count on for partnerships. For someone like most of you and me, I had no idea of the scale of book donation programs. It's a large-scale operation. Over our nearly 50 years, IBB alone donated 25 million books. And there is that challenge of getting books to and from a warehouse. This is a real truck and a real picture of our warehouse. We did find a big warehouse finally, and this is a picture of our loading dock. On the right, you'll see boxes packed in plastic. They're ready to be loaded onto a shipping container. You can see the door is kind of open. And on the left, there's a donation from Zaner Bloser, which was much coveted. It's early readers that we were very happy to receive because the images they included transported easily to another country. After you have the books, then there's the issue of organizing and packing them. We had a big warehouse with racking. We needed to be sure that the boxes didn't fall on staff. Notice that each box has been tagged with a QR code and mapped so that we could find what we were looking for. Running this kind of an operation did take money. So this is a picture of Dante and Daniel pulling books according to requests, and this is a well-packed shipment. And then that shipment had to be bundled and loaded and packed in a particular way, you'll see on the bottom right, into a shipping container. Our books were shipped in either 20 or 40-foot containers from the Port of Baltimore. There's a cost for shipping and a cost for offloading, even though there's a special rate for shipping books to charitable organizations. So, how do I know where William's book came from? Well, it was part of a donation to IBB from Macmillan. There was a request from the National Library of Malawi for K-16 materials that they divided up. We found a donor. Books were shipped to Kenya and then transported to Malawi, and then the books were distributed, And a report was submitted and photos were sent, and voila, there's William and his book. Um, there is a changing landscape of book donations. When I began with IBB, there were 4 major book donation services. Then there were 3, now there's one. It's called Books for Africa. The move to digital publishing meant that publishers don't have as much to donate, and the cost of shipping and handling has gone up. And the strictness of the model employed is also an issue. So if you send part just random donated books and part what I would call curated shipments, it's a lot cheaper than only sending curated shipments. So in 2015, IBB officially closed. We were functioning on a shoestring, and frankly, we didn't have the money to do an all-out donation campaign. But they're really alternatives to shipping books, and some of them seem logical and aren't as successful as they might be, but some are really good. Computers are and will continue to be a part of any literate person's life, and a single device can hold lots and lots of books. Clearly, they're easier to ship. But as a literacy professional, I want to say that learning to read from print is much easier than learning to read from a screen. So I am going to talk about just a couple of models I'm really happy about. This one is called the African Storybook Project, and we know that children learn to read best if given text in their mother tongue. African Storybook translates simple stories with African appropriate illustrations into many, many, many local languages. There's still the problem of how to download them and share them, but it's still an exciting model. And this is a model from Code, an organization that I work closely with, part of a program called Reading Liberia. There's also Reading Sierra Leone, Reading Ghana, etc. It's supported by Code, and Code pays for the first printing, the first print run, and allows new publishers to benefit from the proceeds so that they can grow. And I've got to say, seeing kids open a book in which they recognize their community and their problems and see the author and illustrator come from their own country is not just a thrill, but it's also motivating. But I can't conclude this presentation without pointing to an essential fact. Good books need good teachers. What made William so special to me is that he was a kid with what I would call agency. He wanted to figure something out, and he used all the resources available to him, from stuff in the junkyard to resources in the local library. But to really make a large-scale difference, a difference that will serve a large number of young people anxious to enter the world as literate citizens, books cannot be seen as foreign objects, only available to the privileged. Thank you.